All right.
We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
Welcome, youth baseball community. Welcome, baseball community. Welcome, youth baseball coaches / parents. Welcome to our weekly get-together here, the 80-20 Baseball Podcast, the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass, where we're first looking to master the big needle movers, the most important things, the key items, and then working from there. Of course, one of the pillars of this podcast is the 80-20 principle, the 80-20 rule. And speaking of a little more 80 than 20, I'm going to get into somebody who hits the ball so hard it usually doesn't end up within 20 feet of the outfield fence, but usually 80 plus feet over the fence. I'll talk about this giant hitter in just a little bit. We're going to dive into coaching at practice and coaching during the game and how this should look very similar and in what ways this should look very similar. At the end of the podcast, I am going to be a little blunt and share one of my big don'ts, as in don't do this, or at least don't do this very much when you're out there coaching. And by not doing this, you're guaranteed to be coaching up your players more than the majority of coaches out there at all levels. So we'll have that hard talk, that talk about something that as coaches, it's very important to stay disciplined with, because it's easy not to follow this path. And we'll dive into that and how everybody wins by saying no to this very common habit of coaches. Last week, I was talking about tennis rackets, and I kid you not, my neighborhood has a huge yard sale every year. It's a community yard sale, garage sale. It had to be well over 100 houses loading up their lawn and their driveways with all sorts of stuff, lots of good sports equipment, tennis rackets. There was a family selling tennis rackets that still worked. They were a little older. They weren't brand new by any means. They were scratched up a little. They were selling tennis rackets. They had 5 of them for 50 cents each. Definitely scored a couple of those ourselves. And at another yard sale down the street from that one, 25-cent cans unopened of tennis balls. 6 of them. $1.50 for 18 brand new tennis balls. By the way, the old guy was selling them, and he says to me, "Hey, if you want to get a little more bounce out of these, throw them in the microwave for a minute." Well, I said, shoot, I'm a product of the 80s and 90s. I'm a master with that microwave. These tennis balls came out of the can fresh. They had plenty of pop. So we picked up 2 tennis rackets and 15 brand new tennis balls for $2.50. Hey, those yard sales can be great places to get baseballs, practice gear, buckets. Sometimes being resourceful can get you some really good gear. You're not going to get the latest and greatest baseball bat. You're probably not going to find 5 dozen pearls, brand new gamer baseballs. Probably not going to find that, but yard sales, finding some gear. One of my old neighbors, Fred, he had 8 canteens out and some mess kits from when he was in the military in the 50s. Old man Fred's about 90, real nice guy. He was selling these sweet canteens, good shape. Nevertheless, yard sales can be a really great place to stock up on some training equipment, items that don't have to be brand new or perfect game quality. All right, speaking of game quality, how we coach in the game and how we coach during the game, our mannerisms, our attitude, our personality, our energy level, our vibe, our intensity shouldn't be much different. And in fact, it should be very closely aligned with how we coach during practice. It's very important that we avoid being a different coach during the games when it comes to our vibe, our energy, our intensity. In fact, if you are going to err to one side or the other, I would err towards having more energy during practice, more intensity during practice, faster, quicker, more demanding during practice, and then calmer during the games. Ideally, it would be about equal. So as coaches, generally speaking, we should not act differently or much differently at practices than we do at the games and vice versa. We should have a similar vibe, energy level, intensity. And like I said, if you're going to up the energy and intensity level a little bit more so than your average level, I'd do it during practice. Remember the equation: harder practices, easier games, easier practices, harder games. We should coin that something to the effect of the law of training difficulty. It's an absolute and you can take it to the bank. So with that said, if you're going to have an uptick in energy and intensity, it should be during practice. It shouldn't be the other way around. Players feed off that. Players can sense that. They can feel it. They can sniff it out. They may not consciously be aware of it. They may not consciously think about it, but it can affect them. And think about the intensity of a game versus practice for a kid naturally is going to be higher, almost inevitably will be higher. The intensity, the stress level of a game because of the environment. There's an umpire, jerseys on, people in the stands, playing against their friend's team, playing in front of people they know that are watching. So it's very important that we stay even keel from practice to the games. This is much easier said than done. And the first step towards mitigating this energy and stress increase come game time is to first pay attention to it, know it's probably going to happen, be ready for it. You can feel your heart beat a little faster. You can feel your muscles get a little tenser as a coach. You might even find yourself ready to say something or coach in a way that's different than how you would at practice. So be ready for that. It's normal. It's natural. I don't think we should be a dead fish in the back of the dugout, slumped over on the bucket. The players are wondering if we're taking a nap or not. We should have some energy during the game, but it should be even or relatively even to the energy level, to the vibe that we show at practice. Now, not only does this help our players because they're going to feed off of us one way or the other, it also helps us stay in control of ourselves more by having this as a plan, by having this as the goal, by being aware of this and trying to achieve this balanced coaching approach. It helps us from getting away from ourselves, from getting outside of what we want to be as a coach. It's a way to check ourselves, if you will, to keep ourselves in check. So same vibe, different environment. Let's keep the practice vibe and the game vibe that we're giving off, that same energy, that same level of intensity. Let's keep that the same or very similar. Now, if you find yourself during the game thinking, hey, this energy level that I have at the game, this intensity is a good fit for my club, well then do that at practice and work from there. Use that as feedback and say, well, this is the energy, this is the vibe I need to have at practice and match it up that way. It's not always I need to bring it down during the games. Most of the time it is, especially when the heart starts beating, start getting competitive more so than you'd like. Usually you got to simmer it down a little, but sometimes you got to bring it up at practice more. Sometimes you got to elevate practice. So sometimes it's the practice side that needs to be lifted up. Typically the practice side doesn't ever need to be toned down in terms of energy. Now negativity, yes. But the energy level at practice typically never needs to be toned down and then the game brought up. It's usually the other way around. But look to match those as best as you can. And by doing this, we'll very likely be better coaches than we otherwise would be. All right, speaking of stepping up at practice and at games, tell you what, somebody who puts in a lot of work and shows up during the games. This is a player who just over a month ago was being booed by his own fans on his own bobblehead day. And now when they announce him to come up to the plate, quite a few fans are standing up, giving him a standing ovation, even in the first inning of a series opening game. Now, I'm bringing this up, I'm sharing this as a great example that we can take and use with our players. In fact, I had a listener, you know who you are, reached out to me this last week, even took a guess and got it right on what player I was going to bring up. And in fact, this coach, this dad, brought up this player with his own kid as an example of what real success, and in this case hitting, looks like. Kid might not have had a great game or had a bad week or off to a tough start during the season. And the dad says, hey, even the great Aaron Judge only gets 3 hits every 10 at-bats. The great Aaron Judge. And man, is he doing awesome. And again, I try really hard to take all of this and spin it towards something that we can use as youth baseball coaches or baseball coaches of any level, but definitely so we can use these with youth baseball players. I like to use these examples, and I've said this a lot before, that we can all see on TV, on YouTube, that we can easily see tons of footage of, like an Aaron Judge. And we can show our players so we can relate and see the same example but I'm very careful to make sure that this is something that boils down to the youth level. And I watched Aaron Judge hit this last weekend. He was playing the Dodgers, and I watched about 6 of his at-bats, full at-bats. And this makes me want to share this. One of the reasons I think the hitting approach, the hitting plan is so undervalued, it's because one, we can't see it directly because you'd have to read the mind of the hitter. But if you watch enough baseball and you watch the hitters enough and you look at stats and data to back it up, you can make a good guess as to what the hitter's approach is. And you can make a good guess at the hitters that don't really have a plan up there in terms of pitch selection. Looking at a swing, you see every swing, but you don't see the decision making going through a player's head, through their mind, of course. But we don't need to see it to know what they're doing if you watch a large enough sample size. And for example, when we see all the highlights of Aaron Judge leading the league in all these stats and crushing all these pitches and hitting doubles and home runs, that's what we see on the highlight. On the highlight, they very rarely show, or I should say on the highlights, very rarely does it show the entire at-bat. But that is so important for great hitters. If you want to be a good or great hitter, you have to understand the whole at-bat, or you at least have to understand the hitting plan and hitting approach, not just the swing. The fastest way to get a better swing is to swing at better pitches. Even great swings, even the most elite swings in the world aren't going to hit bad pitches. So watching Judge throughout the year, I saw a lot of highlights of him smoking home runs, doubles, hitting the ball way over the fence, like I mentioned earlier, clearing the fence relatively easy with his home runs. But what stood out the most when I watched those at-bats was how impressive his plan and approach was. That dude is not swinging at anything outside of the strike zone with less than 2 strikes, and he's not swinging at anything that's not in his hitting zone. And with 2 strikes, he's barely swinging at anything. He is swinging at pretty much nothing outside of the strike zone. I did see him swing at a 1-2 slider that was a few inches below the strike zone, but with 2 strikes, and he smoked it for a base hit. You want to hit the ball hard, shrink the area in which you're trying to hit the ball. Shrink the area in which that pitch can come through. Now, to kind of tie this back in with how we can use Aaron Judge, I mentioned how the listener who reached out to me this last week used Aaron Judge with his kid as an example. Why not? When you have a player struggling and you hear about something like this, Aaron Judge, the best hitter in the game right now, getting booed barely a month ago by his own fans, this is a great example to share with our own players that are struggling. If you have a player that's struggling, your own kid, you say, hey, even the best struggle. It would be very easy to make the argument that Aaron Judge is the best hitter on the planet right now. And barring any injuries, I'm going to go out right now and say it would shock me if he doesn't win the MVP award this year. He is dialed in right now. Yeah, his swing's beautiful. The guy can flat out hit. But man, oh man, that hitting approach, he's honed it in, it's dialed in, and the league should really consider walking him a lot more, especially with Stanton and some of the guys behind him not putting up massive numbers. But nevertheless, you have a player that's struggling, you say, hey, even the best of the best struggle. And show a video of it. Go back and get video. There's video, I'm sure, on YouTube of him getting booed a month ago by his own fans, and now look at him. And then show the stats. Say, look, who leads the league in all these stats? And what this does for players is it recalibrates our players' expectations of what success is. The fastest way to fail for an athlete, the fastest way for a player to fail is to set expectations for themselves or to have expectations for themselves that are not truly attainable, that are not realistic. Now, the challenge here is setting goals that are high. You want to set super easy to reach goals. Although I think having success with goals can be hugely important to get that momentum going. That's why setting goals, I think, is a lot harder than we often acknowledge, is you don't want to set the goal too low, but you don't want to set it too high. You want it to be attainable. You want kids, players, people to have a taste of success rather consistently, but it can't be a goal that's like, oh, I reached my goal. That was easy. It's got to be something you feel good about. But the fastest way for a player to fail is to set the bar too high before the game or before practice even starts. And if players go into a game thinking they're going to go 4 for 4, well, they've already set themselves up to fail. Now, their goal should be to go in and have 4 quality at-bats or 5 quality at-bats or 3 quality at-bats. I think that's a lot better goal. And I think that's why it's important to stick to the process and evaluating the hitting approach, hitting plan, quality at-bats. There's a lot of stuff out there on what a quality at-bat is. I don't always agree with all of it and what qualifies for a quality at-bat, but overall the checklist for the quality at-bat are pretty spot on. So when we share these stories of failure with players, especially those players that are super famous, well known by all the kids, that really helps align their expectations with reality and their expectations with realistic outcomes. Speaking of hitting approach, the Dodgers hitting approach as a team does not look good right now. I gotta throw that in there. Y'all know I'm a Dodger fan, but man, that was frustrating to watch them hit. I don't get frustrated when players make outs. I get frustrated when they're up there taking pitches right down the middle with 2 strikes, or swinging weakly with less than 2 strikes, or looking like they're protecting the outside corner on the first pitch of the at-bat. The Dodgers strike out a lot looking, and that's a really good indication of not having a good hitting approach, good hitting plan, pitch selection. Speaking of which, I'll finish up on this. I saw a college team lose a game, and I think their season ended. I think it was the end of a regional from a week ago, and as a lot of you know right now, it's the college baseball playoff time, regionals, super regionals, getting ready for the College World Series. And I saw a team, and I want to say it was college baseball, and I'm almost certain, and I saw the game end on a pitch that was 2 inches off the plate, called a strike. It wasn't in the vertical rectangle that we see on TV, the strike zone per se. It was definitely outside of it. But what I find interesting, and this is something that's a mind shift that we can all have to be better coaches for hitters and have our hitters be a lot better, especially with 2 strikes. You'll have coaches that'll say, hey, I want my team to be great with 2 strikes. I want them to have a great 2-strike adjustment or great 2-strike plan. I want them to be a competitor with 2 strikes. And then when the pitch is 2 inches away from the strike zone and they take it, everybody starts yelling at the umpire for calling it a strike. Are they correct? Well, yes and no. Yeah, they could argue that the pitch wasn't technically in the strike zone, but if at least half of that frustration isn't being directed inward, as in, I'm frustrated at myself as the hitter for not swinging at that pitch, or as a coach, the frustration or the energy should be going towards your own team, your own hitter, for not reaching out and fouling that pitch off. Do you trust the umpire more on a pitch that's really close than you do yourself to reach out and foul it off? Or, hey, you put it into play. You might even bloop it over the third baseman or first baseman's head for a double. Very likely could reach out, poke it, foul it off, and see another pitch. The pitcher's not going to just pinpoint 2 inches off the plate all night long. They're going to either throw a couple more balls and walk you, or they're going to throw one down the middle eventually if you battle and foul those pitches off. I have found myself do a 180 on this. When I watch my lifelong favorite team, the Dodgers, batting, and their hitter takes a pitch close to the strike zone for strike 3, I don't think, man, umpire, what are you calling that? That's not a strike. Come on, umpire. The first thing I think of now is you got to swing at that pitch. It's way too close to take. And in youth baseball, that way too close extends out quite a bit, as all of you know. So, a couple things to take out of that. Use these well-known players that we all put on pedestals that kids look up to. Use that as examples of when they fail and that they're not perfect, to recalibrate our own kids' expectations for their success. All right, now, if you don't want to hear the blunt truth right now, if you don't want to hear something that we all need to hear as coaches, then you should just stop the podcast now, stop the episode now, and this is going to hit home. But this is something that I saw early on, and I did early on. I made this mistake early on because I saw it as part of the culture. I saw it as part of the coaching culture at all levels, and that is coaches. When we sign up, when we commit to be the coach, we're signing up, we're committing to go out there and give that time to coaching up our players, to coaching up our kids. And that looks different, of course. That plays out different depending on if it's practice, pregame, during the game, etc. Coaching up players can look a lot of different ways, but we've signed up to coach up players. We've committed to those players. We have not signed up for visitation time with other adults. We've committed to the kids, not to visiting with other adults. Sometimes after a busy day at work, especially if you work in an industry or at a job or your company with others that maybe you don't connect with as much, you get out to practice and you're with some other dads on the baseball field, maybe you have a common interest in certain things and you start visiting, you start talking. It could be very enticing to do that. I'll tell you what, I absolutely loved doing that when I first started coaching, but I realized I had my priorities mixed up. I wanted to be a coach. It was coaching hours, not visiting hours. And it's so easy to spend time talking with the other coaches, whether that's on your staff or your team or with the other coaches. It can be very easy and a lot of fun to get caught up in those conversations. My recommendation is not to avoid them necessarily, but to have a quick, hard out ready to go when you get into those conversations. do not feel bad keeping them short and sweet. Now, with that said, I think it's best just to not start into a deeper conversation, because that makes it a lot harder to get out of and then back to coaching up the players. It can be cordial, quick, say hi. And if you want to catch up with, say, the assistants, and I've recommended this before, if you're on a coaching staff, which hopefully if you are managing, you have a couple assistants, I recommend setting up a golf outing or a dinner where you guys can shoot the breeze, visit, and get some of that out of our system. So I know it's not easy to say no to these conversations. They can be fun. It can be very enjoyable, talking to another adult rather than working with some of the rascally kids. I get it. But we've committed to being the kids' coach, and we've committed to coaching up our players and not to visiting with other adults. And this should be the mindset, in my opinion, at practice, during the games, and during pregame. To keep it easy, you have your parameters. You have when practice starts to the time practice finishes, it's non-visitation hours. After practice, that's cool. Before practice, a little harder because you should be prepping, getting ready for practice, probably getting there, coming from work. And that's always a good out right there. Hey, I want to hear more about that. Let's talk after practice. Hey, I definitely want to hear about that. Hey, let's talk after practice. It'd be great to hear more about that. So this is something that is very common in the coaching community, and that is coaches congregating together, getting together, visiting a lot during the pregame when we should be coaching up our players, organizing pregame, getting those quality reps in, getting our players' mindset right, practice time for check that, and definitely practice time. And when you start thinking about how practice time is so finite at the youth level, that's when it starts becoming a lot easier to say no to those conversations. That's what happened to me. I started to understand how much I really wanted to coach up my players, and when I started to become a better coach, I realized what it took to be a good coach, and that did not allow for a lot of extra visitation time. The transition wasn't so much that I wanted to avoid that, it's that I wanted to be a better coach. And as a byproduct of that, I found myself needing to leave some of these conversations that I would have normally sat there for 15, 20, 30 minutes and stayed in while the kids were over there doing this or doing that. And that helped push me towards reducing those side conversations and coaching up my players more. So something to keep an eye on. As coaches, our commitment is to coach up the players, not have long conversations with the other coaches, parents, adults in the area. So keep that in mind as you are coaching up your team. And you might think, Coach Bo, what if I've automated parts of my practice? The throwing routine is automated. The warm-up routine is automated. I got some of these drills on autopilot. Great, that should happen. But now use that for one-on-one time with players, working on specific skill development with players, working on connecting with players, working on finding out maybe why one of your players isn't looking too confident. They got their head down, not feeling well. That's why we automate and systematize parts of our practice. Well, part of it. The other part of it is the kids want a sense of autonomy. They thrive in a sense of autonomy that we've set the parameters for, of course, but having that extra time now to free you up to coach more of a one-on-one connect with players type of interactions. Those one-on-one interactions, connecting with individual players, those interactions can happen more frequently and more consistently by having that automated and autopilot setup that you've implemented with your players. It's not a time to go over and sit in the dugout and visit and chat it up with the other coaches. I know some of y'all are going to be like, but that's what I do. I get it. But I gave you some ways to work around it. And just saying, if you want to be a good coach, you got to push that stuff to after practice or maybe a coach's outing or after the game or a barbecue at your house. All right, next week, we'll have a segment on how to use a very popular game that's not baseball to teach the game of baseball. We haven't talked about this on the podcast. And one of the struggles with youth baseball is getting the kids to learn the game in a safe way and getting them to learn how to play the game, especially on defense, where to make the out, where the play's at, and trying to do that in an efficient way, getting a high quality number of reps in doing this. So next week, I'm going to share with you a game that's not baseball, but can be used to help our players learn the game of baseball better. And I'll share a few tips on even how to run that. And that'll come next week. If you wouldn't mind, the one way that I ask to have you all help support the show is to leave a review. You've been here, you're liking the show, leave a review, even if it's just a quick 3-4 sentences. That can really help this show. And send it to a friend, send them the link to the podcast, and go from there. That would be greatly appreciated. With that said, until next week, let's take care of our health so we can be there to take care of our families, our close friends, and let's take this information out to the field. Let's put it into play. Let's not go down looking like my Dodgers have been a lot recently. Let's go out there, let's put this into play and go from there. All right, everyone, take care. And until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.